Imagine yourself as one of the crew of this faster-than-light spaceship of the future.
Hi, amigos.
Do you miss Earth?
To a star system far beyond our own galaxy.
Space opera. The phrase sounds ridiculous, right? Like some weird Frankenstein hybrid of Star Wars and The Bold and the Beautiful. And that's basically how it started, as an insult. Back in the 1920s, critics were already mocking formulaic westerns known as horse operas. 2 decades later, writer Wilson Tucker borrowed the joke. In 1941, he coined the term space opera to describe cheap, melodramatic sci-fi adventures flooding pulp magazines. Soap opera with spaceships. A jab at stories full of square-jawed heroes, improbable planets, and silver underwear. But the joke didn't stick. Space opera didn't die. It evolved and became the beating heart of science fiction, the branch that let us dream in colour. Zoom out far enough, and this is the genre that asks the biggest question of all. What happens when humanity finally gets out there, when we're not the centre of the story anymore? Every era has answered that question differently, and that's what this video is about. We're going to travel from 1928 to 2025, exploring how space opera evolved from pulp rocketman to billion-dollar epics about AI, identity and survival. From Flash Gordon to The Expanse, Dune to Mass Effect, we'll see how each generation reimagined the stars to reflect its own hopes and fears. So buckle in. From pulp dream to philosophical mirror, this is the evolution of space opera, a century of spaceships, existential dread, and very dramatic lighting. Before hyperspace and morally conflicted AI gods, there were pulp magazines. Brightly coloured, cheaply printed, and usually smelling faintly of basement. This is where space opera was born, in the pages of amazing stories and astounding stories, where physics took a backseat to pure, unfiltered imagination. Even though the phrase space opera didn't appear until 1941, the spirit of the term was already alive more than a decade earlier. In 1928, E. Doc Smith published The Skylark of Space, often called the first true space opera. It had everything: a genius inventor, a kidnapped damsel, evil aliens, and a spaceship that could cross the galaxy powered by pure hand-wavium. It was ridiculous, and readers loved it. Smith followed with the Lensman series, which set the blueprint for half a century of intergalactic heroes. Think Green Lantern, Star Wars, and every chosen space cop story you've ever seen. All of them owe a debt to the Doc. At the same time, Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon were turning cosmic adventure into mass entertainment. There were pure escapism, rockets with fins, laser battles, and villains with suspicious facial hair. Subtle? No. But in the middle of the Great Depression and on the cusp of war, they offered something more valuable: hope, wrapped in chromium and starlight. Of course, these early tales carried all the attitudes of their age. Planets were colonies to be tamed, villains were outsiders to be crushed, and science was clean, shining force for good. It was naive, but charmingly so. Looking back, those pulps captured the raw excitement of a species about to step off its own planet for the first time. There was no irony yet, just the thrill of what if. But by the end of World War II, humanity had split the atom, flattened cities, and, just to really drive home the point, realised it might actually launch something into space. The pulp dream of rockets and ray guns suddenly didn't feel so far-fetched. Space opera, which had started as escapism, was about to get serious. The golden age of science fiction, roughly 1938 to the mid-1950s, began under editor John W. Campbell at Astounding Science Fiction. He demanded logic, discipline, and scientific credibility from his writers. The result was a revolution: space adventure infused with reason, engineering, and moral clarity. Writers like Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, and Paul Anderson took the pulp template and filled it with politics, psychology and philosophy. In Asimov's Foundation series, which began in 1942, Empire wasn't just a backdrop, it was a mathematical inevitability. Histories itself became a kind of science, with psychohistorians predicting the fall and rise of civilizations like accountants balancing galactic spreadsheets. Meanwhile, Clarke gave us cosmic awe in Childhood's End in 1953 and The City and the Stars in 1956. Humanity reached for the stars only to discover we might not be ready for what is out there. Clarke's aliens didn't invade, they enlightened. His vision of space wasn't a place to conquer, but to transcend. Even on screen, science fiction was growing up. Forbidden Planet in 1956 swapped ray guns for Freudian metaphors and Shakespearean subtext. It was still shiny and strange, but now it came with a moral. The golden age of space opera was neat, ordered and rational. Gone were the wild excesses of pulp. In their place came moral certainty and gleaming scientific optimism. It was the age of pipe smoke, pocket protectors, and perfectly logical futures. I think this was when space opera finally grew up. It stopped shouting about adventure and started lectures about destiny. Maybe it wasn't as fun, but it certainly felt smarter. By the 1960s, the space race was real, the counterculture was in full swing, and sci-fi was tripping on its own potential. Suddenly the future didn't look clean and orderly anymore. It started to look weird. And that's when New Wave came in. My new book, Tao Solandis, is now available. Links in the description because, well, of course it is. It's set at the end of time where an ancient AI guards the final stories of the universe. These are 6 interconnected tales of sci-fi with heart, brains, and just a sprinkle of existential dread. So if that sounds like your thing, grab a copy now before the heat death of the universe kills us all. If the Golden Age gave us engineers, the New Wave gave us poets, philosophers, and iconoclasts with too much time, imagination, and sometimes too much LSD. Space opera took a hard left turn, often politically so, from square-jawed heroics to introspective, morally complex, and deeply human storytelling. Of course, not everything from this era was what we might call space opera. Many of these writers were rebelling against it, breaking the genre down to see what it could become. It was a literary rebellion, led by writers like Michael Moorcock, who edited New Worlds magazine and threw open the airlock to experimental fiction. J.G. Ballard turned the gaze inward, writing about philosophical landscapes instead of alien ones. His Inner Space, The Mind as Frontier, redefined what the genre could explore. And then came Frank Herbert's Dune in 1965, a sandstorm of ecology, religion, prophecy and power. Herbert's desert world wasn't just another backdrop for adventure, it was an entire ecosystem of belief and politics. Dune asked, what happens when a messiah actually arrives? And what does that do to the world that worships him? Samuel R. Delany fused myth and modernism in Nova in 1968 and Babel 17 in 1966, exploring art, language and identity through starships and alien worlds. Philip K. Dick, meanwhile, turned the lens inward, away from galaxies and toward the fragile, flickering nature of reality itself. His visions of false memories, corporate gods, and collapsing identities made the future feel deeply personal and deeply unreliable. And then Ursula K. Le Guin replaced laser battles with anthropology. The Left Hand of Darkness in 1969 sent a human envoy to a planet of androgynous beings and quietly exploded our assumptions about gender, culture, and what it means to connect. But maybe the most radical voice was M. John Harrison. In The Centauri Device in 1974, his protagonist wasn't a hero, just a weary drifter dragged into a pointless war. The galaxy wasn't grand or noble, it was decaying, cynical, and absurd. Harrison took the shiny chrome rocket ship and stripped it for parts. Meanwhile, cinema was discovering philosophy. Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey in 1968 and Tarkovsky's Solaris in 1972 turned outer space into inner space, meditations on evolution, consciousness, and loneliness. They replaced dogfights with silence, mystery, and monoliths. I think the New Wave was the moment space opera stopped being a power fantasy and started being a mirror. It asked, not what can we build, but what does all this building mean? By the late 70s, space opera had drifted light years from its pulpy adventure roots. It was poetic, often abstract, full of literary ambition and existential dread, which was great for critics but not exactly selling out cinemas. And then, in 1977, George Lucas showed up with one simple idea. What if we made space opera fun again?
Star Wars. 1 billion years in the making. And it's coming to your galaxy.
Star Wars hit like a supernova. Lucas called it space fantasy, but it was built from the bones of old pulp, heroes, empires, laser swords, and mythic destiny, reforged through the lens of Joseph Campbell's hero journey, archetypes, and powered by industrial light and magic. It was Saturday matinee spectacle reborn with symphonic grandeur. That film didn't just revive space opera, it mainstreamed it. Overnight, the galaxy became pop culture's new playground. Battlestar Galactica appeared on TV a year later, essentially Diet Star Wars, but still beloved. Star Trek found new life in cinemas with the motion picture in 1979 and The Wrath of Khan in 1982, blending moral dilemmas with emotional depth. Japan joined the party early. Space battleship Yamato in 1974 set the tone for animated space epics, treating its crew like mythic warriors rather than cartoon adventures. Meanwhile, video games were catching up. Elite in 1984 let players trade, fight, and explore across the procedurally generated galaxy. For the first time, you could be the pilot, not just read about them. Television caught up too. Star Trek The Next Generation from 1987 to 1994, and later Babylon 5 from 1994 to 1998, brought moral nuance and serialized politics back to the stars, proving space opera could think weekly. Of course, the blockbuster boom had its downsides. Space opera became louder, shinier, and occasionally dumber. Moral nuance gave way to merchandising. You couldn't swing a lightsaber in the 1980s without hitting a toy commercial.
Star Wars figures. R2-D2. Chewbacca, Luke, and Princess Leia. They're the Star Wars Early Bird set of figures. These action figures are not yet available, but this Star Wars Early Bird certificate package is in stores, with this colorful Star Wars picture display stand and certificate to send in to get a set of figures by mail.
But that didn't matter. For an entire generation, this was their first contact with the infinite, and it was fracking awesome. I think the beauty of this era is how unashamed it was. There was no irony, no apology, just pure mythic wonder turned up to 11. It reminded everyone why we fell in love with space in the first place. After a decade of doubt, the galaxy was safe for adventure again, and Hollywood took command. However, by the early 90s, the blockbuster hangover started to kick in. Space opera had conquered the world, sold all the toys, and left behind a galaxy of cliches. The chosen hero, the evil empire, the laser battle at sunset. It all felt a bit hollow. So a new generation of writers tore it down and rebuilt it. Critics started calling it the new space opera. Darker, smarter, stranger, and infinitely more self-aware. The groundwork for the new space opera had ironically been laid decades earlier by M. John Harrison, whose The Centauri device in 1974 detonated the genre's illusion from within. His anti-heroes drifted through decaying empires, painfully aware of their own futility. It was space opera as a self-critique, the genre staring into a mirror and flinching. Then came Dan Simmons' Hyperion in 1989, a cathedral of interwoven stories told by pilgrims on a doomed world. It was literary and human in ways few sci-fi epics dared to be. Love, faith, trauma, and time collapsing into myth. Soon after, Vernor Vinge's Fire Upon the Deep in 1992 imagined a galaxy divided by zones of thought, where physics itself, limited intelligence, effused hard science logic and mythic scope, a tale of godlike AIs, lost children, and civilizations burning across the stars. In many ways, it rekindled a sense of wonder that would fuel the new space opera to come. Meanwhile, Iain M. was reinventing utopia. Beginning with Consider Fleabas in 1987, his culture novels imagined anarchic, AI-run societies meddling in lesser worlds for their own good. They combined idealism and irony, politics and absurdity, moral epics where no one could quite tell who was right. Japan kept expanding the form of animation through Macross and later Cowboy Bebop in 1998, which turned bounty hunting in space into existential jazz. The 2000s expanded that horizon again. Alastair Reynolds' Revelation Space in the year 2000 fused gothic atmosphere and astrophysical realism. Vast, haunted galaxies where extinction was inevitable, but beauty endured. Peter F. Hamilton, starting with the reality dysfunction in 1996, went maximalist. Interstellar economies, neural resurrection and soap operatic scale cranked up to cosmic proportions. Even games joined the chorus. Homeworld in 1999 turned real-time strategy into tragedy, a ballet of starships and exile. EVE Online in 2003 gave players a living, evolving galaxy of social and economic simulation where betrayal and empire were human-made. Mass Effect in 2007 redefined space opera for a new generation, combining cinematic storytelling with moral choice and emotional consequence. It felt like Star Trek written by Iain M. political, romantic, tragic and vast. Its vision of unity and sacrifice among species still stands as one of the most human stories ever told in digital form. By mid-decade, the movement had a name, the New Space Opera, formerly centering around Banks, Reynolds, Hamilton, Baxter, Simmons and others, combining them into a shared vision. Grand-scale storytelling without the old simplicity. What united them wasn't optimism, but awe. The New Space Opera wasn't about conquering the stars, it was about surviving them. Humanity no longer was the centre, just one more story in a cold, magnificent cosmos. Personally, I think this was the richest, most emotionally resonant era of all. The galaxies were vaster, the stakes more intimate, and the tone more honest. By the 2010s, space opera had reached a kind of equilibrium. It had been naive, serious, weird, spectacular and philosophical, and now it seemed comfortable being all of them at once. Modern space opera is defined by its diversity of theme. You'll find sprawling political thrillers, quiet meditations on AI, intimate character dramas, and yes, even alien spiders debating ethics. It's a genre that has learned to hold contradiction, wonder, dread, hope, and humility in the same breath. At the grounded end sits James S.A. Corey's The Expanse from 2011 to 2021, probably this generation's unifying epic. It took interplanetary politics and made them personal, showing how systems, not villains, grind people down. It was space opera as political realism, rooted in hard science and social consequence. We even got an epic TV show. Then came Anne Leckie's Ancillary Justice in 2013, which put readers inside a warship AI forced to inhabit a single human body. Clever, cerebral, and unexpectedly moving, it explored identity and obedience, and guilt in a universe without easy morality. Across the spectrum, Becky Chambers' Wayfarer series beginning in 2014 asked a radical question. What if space didn't have to be grim? Her stories traded empires for empathy, focusing around found families, kindness, and community among the stars. And Adrian Tchaikovsky reminded us that evolution never stops, even in the void. Children of Time in 2015 turned the old colony ship trope into something mythic and biological, humans trying to play God and spiders learning to be better at it. Tchaikovsky's work feels like the new frontier, still cosmic but grounded in adaptation. Cinema rediscovered its seriousness too. Christopher Nolan's Interstellar in 2014 blended real astrophysics with raw emotion, turning wormholes and black holes into metaphors for love, memory and endurance. Not space opera in the strictest sense, but it brought emotion and space on an epic scale back to the theatres. Then Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 1 in 2021 and Part 2 in 2024 transformed pulp prophecy into prestige art, while Andor in 2022 brought political realism and emotional gravity back to the Star Wars universe. Just as cinema rediscovered nuance, television reclaimed scope. Streaming opened the galaxy wider still, from Andor to The Mandalorian to Apple TV's Foundation, which reimagined Asimov's saga for a new era, turning equations and empires into a sweeping meditation on power, faith and fate. It attempts to translate mid-century optimism, to varying degrees of success, into something more human, fragile, flawed, and aware of its own cycles of collapse. Space opera found a new home on our living room screens, slow burn world building for the streaming age. Even Dune got its own TV prequel, Dune Prophecy, in 2004, set 10,000 years before Paul Atreides, chronicling the birth of the Bene Gesserit Order, proving the golden age of sci-fi, though long gone, is certainly not forgotten. Modern space opera isn't defined by scale anymore, it's defined by perspective. Humanity is no longer the centre. AI, alien, insect, machine, everybody gets a voice. The old stories promised we'd rule the stars. The new ones quietly ask if we even should. The cosmos is no longer just a backdrop for adventure, it's a mirror, a reflection of our data ghosts, our collective myths, and the messy, hopeful creatures that made them. Turns out the aliens were never out there. They were always us. And after nearly a century, space opera has done something remarkable. It survived its own exaggeration. It's gone from pulp adventure to philosophical mirror, from toy aisles to literary canon. Every generation has looked to the stars and seen itself staring back. That's why I think space opera endures. It isn't just a genre, it's a language for the things too vast for Earth. Faith, power, technology, morality. Whatever comes next, I'm certain the heart of space opera won't change. We'll keep telling stories about leaving home, finding connection, and staring into the infinite. Because the distance between the stars is nothing compared to the distance between who we are and who we might become. Not bad for something that started as a joke about soap operas in space.